Welcome back to Highway Through Health. We're not a crisis line, we're not a therapy show, and we're not licensed healthcare providers. What we are is a place where lived experience is taken seriously because too many people have discovered the more clearly they speak, the worse they're treated. We share personal experience not to give medical advice, but so that when people encounter the kinds of situations we discuss, they're ready to recognize patterns and respond effectively. This show is about language, power, and what happens when systems stop listening and start translating people into problems. If you've ever felt misheard, mislabeled, or punished for staying coherent under pressure, you're in the right place.
It's not a problem. I'm not tech adept either, so
All right.
it's all good.
All right. So here we are for episode 13. And I thought we're kind of talking about staying aligned, even when it costs you a lot. And when I was thinking about this, I went back to the time when I was first put in a nursing home, and there was this guy in there. I'm pretty sure he had Huntington's because he was about in his, late 30s, early 40s, or whatever. It was about when the time when that hits people.
Yeah.
And he couldn't. His hands that by that time were all kind of like mine. They were useless. They were all kind of like knots. And he couldn't feed himself, and he was just completely dependent on everything. Couldn't move. Probably couldn't even roll over in bed. And I remember just being grateful, laying in there in that nursing home in that hot. It was wintertime in Minneapolis. They had radiators to heat the rooms up, and there was no fans in any room. And when you get night sweats with all those medications you get, and you're laying in a place like that, and your own body fluid, and you think about people like that, and there's nothing they could do to defend themselves. He can only be one person. Whatever happens to him, whoever comes into his room, or whatever happens to him that day, he's completely unable to fight back. And there are so many people in those positions, especially in the disability community, because it's that kind of victimhood that fuels a lot of profiteering,
Yes.
unfortunately. So I think, when we sit and people might consider our rhetoric a bit harsh or a little bit too sharp or something of that nature, just realize that we have been around, seen, interacted with, and probably in some way, shape, or form are friends with people who are so profoundly disabled that you would be the fact that anyone can just get up, walk around, and see, it puts you miles ahead of where these people are. And if you can imagine trying to maintain a sense of dignity, trying to maintain a sense of purpose, and things of that nature in an environment like that when you're profoundly disabled, believe me, those people get put through hell. So, we're fighting back, and when our sharp in our rhetoric, I know that guy in the nursing home as a person who was mentally. I mean, I had a little iPad, which was kind of new at the time. It was a Samsung pad, actually, and I went to show it to him, and he was really interested in looking at it because I had all my books on there, and I was telling him, I use this to read, and he was trying to interact with it because he didn't get a chance to interact with anything, really. And because his hands wouldn't work and nothing was happening. And of course there's nothing like that for those people in those situations for the
Right.
most part because we usually just warehouse them and you don't think about them. So when we talk about some of the things we talk about, I hope it's people understand there is a reason for the sharpness, and some of it is because we know it can get a lot worse. We know what those kinds of labels can do to us. We know that um, too many people piling on with the wrong kind of labels can put us in the exact same position that the guy with Huntington's is in, even though we're not that profoundly disabled. Because this the psych industry and it's so, excuse me, exploitive towards people like that, um, and nobody really speaks up. So I guess we're wanting to talk about how getting aligned is kind of easy until there's a price to be paid, until there's a little bit of cost to do that. And there were a couple of verses, I guess, I read out of Matthew just before we started. One of them was about the you know, how my burden is light, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And you contrast that with a little bit earlier where he said, I didn't come to bring peace, I came to bring a sword. And you're kind of like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Well, you realize that when the truth is used to push anything that's deceptive out of the way, which means it goes into your social background, how you're picked up, how you were raised, what you went through, all those kind of social conformities with deception that you're expected to get into, those get chopped up, just like it happened through my immersive experience. And sounds like it happened through your immersive experience. So we're trying to help people understand what this means. Once Dana and I were talking earlier today, and we mentioned that we didn't really understand what a lot of these texts meant until we had that immersive experience. It's that moment of crystallization that comes over you that ties all that stuff together. And it's such a profound, moving experience that leaves you with a profound sense of appreciation for life itself. And when that piece is missing, it makes text like that really, really hard to understand because it really was that nice and it really was that distinct. It was,
Yeah.
get that crap away from me.
Yeah.
And that crap was deception. The kind we
Yeah.
know about and the kind we don't know about. So that's
Right.
where I think maybe one of the ways to find what you don't know about is to get out there and put yourself out there and start feeling where you do get the pushback. Kind
Yeah.
of like they say, when you're drawing flack, you're over the target. So get out there and kind of do that. Not we don't try to be offensive. Maybe it comes out that way, but it's really in that sense of we're biased to attack, not sit back and be complicit or complacent. Does that make any sense, or am I just rambling?
No, that totally makes sense. And it kind of goes back to what we had discussed before about the death of fear. And that really does absolutely play into it when you can confront, even within yourself, what is your fear. When you can either write it down, walk through it, when you can sit and feel comfortable with your own emotions, when you can feel comfortable confronting and releasing and moving past your trauma, when you can feel comfortable not holding on to excuses, not holding on to others' narratives, when you can feel comfortable being able to sit by yourself, be self empowered, be self validating, be able to pray and listen for the answer and be able to follow when your conscience is clear and your consciousness is clear and you are using that network, that direct link to your own spirituality, to your own soul, when you are able to do that, when you do not have a fear even of what's inside of you, when you are able to sit and look at everything, when you are able to forgive people, when you can actually see that your life is constructed in such a way that each lifetime we have challenges, when we are able to meet or exceed those challenges, just the same way that Jesus walked without fear into what he knew was going to be his own death. And he did it bravely because it showed what the evil was around him. And it showed that, and he was not afraid. He had that faith. And to be able to
Mhm.
acquire your own ascension while still in this body, not having to do this via death, uh, and you've already confronted everything that's made you hurt so bad. I mean, I used to cut myself. I certainly had attempted suicide more than a few times, but now I understand that that was a part of what it was. I had to confront. I had to move past. I have to be able to show people because I don't have that in me anymore. I don't want that. I have
Right.
my own life now. I am finally free and away from toxic people and toxic situations and the toxic people who wanted to keep me in a box, to keep me suffering because they were making bank off of it and they were
Hmm.
getting some kind of emotional juice out of it. Well, those folks are loosh bags, if you know the meaning of the word loosh. They're loosh
Yep.
bags. So,
Yeah.
I don't have time for that anymore. I have strong, solid, clear boundaries. I'm able to retake control of my narrative. As we were talking about, things have blown apart. I mean, when I had my seizures, when all that was happening, when the misuse of the hypnotherapy was coming too, Now I understand how it happened. I know who the people
Hmm.
behind it are. I know just how long people were playing off my trauma, profiteering off my trauma, and researching my trauma. And I'm not happy about that, but I am going to use that energy to continue to rebuild my life. I'm going to use that energy to do it not only for myself, but to help other people. I want to
Yeah.
be able for people to see a reflection in my example, and if it triggers them, then they need to examine why it does. Whether that,
Hmm.
for whatever reason, because at the end of the day, you do have to face yourself and God one on one. So that's going to be, that's why I like to say for a lot of things, that's a them problem, not a me problem. I'm not
Right.
bearing nobody else's burdens and bullshits anymore. I don't have the time or the inclination to carry anyone else's baggage. I'm free of my own at this point. I continue to heal. I knew that people were getting pissed off that I could walk again. And what I didn't realize until more recently, because when they were ordering certain drugs and things like the benzos, they were turning around and selling them on the street. That's why they wanted to keep me on them. I didn't want to be on them. They
Hmm.
were making me give my drugs back to them. And I kept thinking, what is your game plan here? This makes no sense. They got pissed one time when I destroyed, the way you're supposed to, because I used to have to do this with my mother.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
Destroy it, and you have to put everything in coffee grounds and kitty litter and all this other stuff so you can
Hmm.
throw it safely away. And they got mad. Well, it wasn't until I figured out, oh, you know what they're doing? They're putting and repackaging and then reselling them as new. And then when I
Wait.
started to figure that out, and then I've seen confirmation, I'm like, oh, this makes sense. The other part of it is they were actually trying to feed us poisons. They
Yeah.
were actually doing that kind of eugenics. They didn't want, because I had said I was going to take them to a lab one time. Now I know why everybody got real spicy about me wanting to take them to a lab. Okay. And Big Pharma is in on this because more than a few times have they found mistakes in like dosing and other stuff that they were trying to OD people that were taking these
Oh
drugs.
yeah, I was when I looked at my records and especially the billing records, they were dispensing stuff that I was refusing and I'd
Yes.
tell them I'm refusing it. I don't want it. That was the $2,800, $3,000 a month Abilify. So what are they doing with that?
Yes.
You're just gonna throw that pill away? I don't think so. Something happens to it because, who knows whether somebody took it or not. Now, the next thing you know, it wouldn't surprise me at all if a lot of these places don't have a secondary function as, the source of a lot of these
They
things
are.
that,
They are.
you, especially looking at how, you know, the exploitive nature of how they work. And so, when we put all these emotions together, I'm thinking back to when I knew that I was going to be getting too sick to work and I knew my career was about to come to an end and a whole bunch of other stuff would come to an end with it. I started going to this group program in Minneapolis at a place called Pathways. It's unfortunately, I think, out of business now. They don't do
Oh,
it. A woman who had MS put this Renewing Life program together. And so people were triaged into this program depending on how sick you were. Like, you go around the room, it was lupus, and I think the guy next to me had a brain tumor. He ended up dying before the
oh,
program was over. Liver cancer, breast cancer, aggressive cancers, things like that. So all these people had everybody who was in that room had very serious health issues that weren't going to go away, not anytime soon. And so getting into that's where I start talking to other people who are going through that is when I started learning about some of this stuff that we're talking about now. Because you think you're doing it right as part of life, because you've got your job, your career, whatever, you're making money. But man, it really doesn't hit home the level of the meaning of the word no. It's this, no. I'll smash your hands, I'll break your feet, I'll blind you, in order to get this
yeah,
message across to you. It's that. And when you start dealing with those kinds of emotions, that was a program where I think you really get introduced to the notion of unwavering honesty and absolute universal value because nobody in that room was being pretentious about a damn thing.
yeah,
Everybody was wondering if you're going to make it to the end of the year or not. and unfortunately one of the people that was in there didn't. And there were some people that weren't that sick, but the program was designed at different levels. That was, you get triaged in fast if you're that sick. Then there was another level down, then there was another level down. But man, that's what you really start getting the feel for what unwavering honesty feels like, because there was no distortion there. This was, how do I deal with this? How do I put this in, how do you motivate yourself even to get through the day knowing what you're going to be facing going forward? And,
Yeah.
and that was like the first tool that really I got introduced to it there at that level.
Yeah, there's a perspective that comes with it. And I know we've talked about this before. When you are aware of facing death, you have a particular kind of perspective. It does narrow your focus down onto
Mhm.
what is truly important, what really matters to me. And me, after having died so many times, and I had one particular death experience when I was dealing with the seizures. I was just talking about this morning. And I, every time I wanted to really die with my Simpsons blanket or with a Simpsons item, in addition to my Lisa Simpson tattoo, because I felt very strongly like that's a major part of my essence,
Mhm.
and remains so. It seems odd that this would be like an 8-year-old cartoon girl, but I know that so many writers that have worked on The Simpsons have put their literal selves into her and had things said through her that were a part of them.
Sure.
So this is kind of in some ways how I actually view the energy of God coming through like each individual person, like uh, contributing a piece of themselves to create something, because look at God as the creator, so the source energy as a creative essence, so we are
Yeah.
all actually reflecting back a piece and a portion of God to a greater whole. And one of those particular experiences, so I grabbed my cat's little Lisa Simpson toy, and I grabbed a CD that was autographed and personally put together for me. I helped select the things from Mike Nesmith, who was a major influence on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was a major influence on my thought process. I mean, not just as an artist, but as an innovator. The things that he had come up with, just his presence. He just had like this real laid back kind of Texan stoicism that I really related to and still do. So I had, and unfortunately, that was, well, again, I kind of lost everything. So it breaks my heart, but it's still out there and it's got my first and last name autographed on it.
Right.
So I hope it finds its way back to me, because I picked out the songs that really meant a lot to me. And that was something that he was doing through Video Ranch at the time.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and I had grabbed that CD and grabbed that, my cat's Lisa Simpson toy, and I lay down on that couch, and the thing that the voice that I heard was like a cosmic energy of a voice. Remember who you are. Remember who you are. And I
Wow.
realized that this was a message to me to remember what my essence is, because I kept being pulled apart and dying over and over and over, and
Hmm.
nobody getting me out of that situation. I was being scared literally to death and dealing with an abuser, and realizing at that time the entirety of my situation. I was dealing with foreign accent syndrome, or whatever they call it at that time. Now I realize that was a piece of channeling. Um,
Hmm.
I have a much fuller awareness now, but when you have to be stripped down to your bare essence, and then when you are given a gift and a granting of a healing, and then you are given not just the responsibility, but the opportunity. I mean, it's such a huge opportunity to
It
rebuild
is.
your life, to redraw your boundaries, to start over from square one. Like I said, I didn't even think I'd be able to sit comfortably, let alone walk again. I walked through
Yeah.
the door. I'm getting ready to go out, and as overwhelming as it can be for me to be out in a public situation, and I do plan ahead, and it is a whole thing for me, and that's the autism. I mean, it was dealing with the CPTSD, but it really is more the sensory overwhelm from the autism. But then I'm
Hmm.
even able to sort that out at this point. and be able to be clear about it. But I still look forward to going out on Sunday. But I got to plan all that, and I'm going to see David Sedaris, and I'm looking forward to that. I've been wanting to see him, go and perform and do readings from his work for years.
Hmm.
In fact, one of the first things I bought on Amazon was audiobooks of him on cassette. This is how long ago it was, of him doing, reading from his material, from his written words. Um, so it is so, but for me it's like such a major thing. It's like, yes, I'm independent, I'm on my own, the only one I have to worry about is me. As much as I miss having cats, um I if I'm able to do this right, and I'm able to put this together to help do build frameworks for Soteria houses, to be able to build a working framework, and a peer
Hmm.
network, and all these things that I'm really putting my energy into and really taking the time to learn every day. Then I'll be traveling, and so it wouldn't be. And I know, even just from having had cats, when I would travel, when Mr. X and I would go to different concerts, and play and visit friends from out of town. I mean, most of my consciousness was really back with my cats. I was always worried. Well, they're like my children, So to
Hmm.
be able to now, like, not only be comfortable physically, but to not have where, and prior to that, when I was having to take care of my mother and things like that,
Hmm.
now it's just me I have to take care of. And now I'm actually learning how to take care of myself and to be fully present and in the moment and appreciate it and appreciate the new life I have and the opportunities that are coming my way, because I did endure and survive.
Right.
And it is a part of my story. And while my trauma isn't the most fun thing I'll ever, talk about or what have you, my survival is. That I can still use music, that I can still be moved so deeply for certain things. And what I'm using is, knowing that they had studied me for brain stuff and were intentionally causing me trauma to study the neurological things. You were talking about somebody that died of brain cancer, and I was actually thinking about Gord Downey and the Tragically Hip earlier, and I had such a spiritual experience listening to the song Music at Work last week,
Oh, wow.
when I was trying to write about why it is I do what I do, and
Hmm.
overcoming trauma. And Gord Downey had passed from glioblastoma, and I thought to myself, if there's some way that, perhaps it's interconnected, because when I heard Music at Work, and the way I'd felt God's presence once during an NDE, it was like I really could feel, and I could hear Gord's voice saying, "This is what I meant by my music at work. How you're processing your life. This is what I meant." And I
Right.
thought, if what I'm doing and the neuroplasticity honestly helps other people who are going through that, if it helps them reverse the effects of certain things without having to use drugs, if it gives his family some kind of comfort to know that his music has really meant so much to somebody who's healing and having to rebuild a whole life, then I'm like extra grateful that I had that opportunity.
That's awesome. And
Yeah,
it was that, and it's really takes us to the second tool, really, that you've been talking about is discernment, because that comes once that deep, unwavering honesty. Once you engage with that, the next thing to start building is discernment. Why? Because you're filtering out what belongs, what doesn't belong. You're plucking out the stuff that doesn't. Then you use that defiance that we talked about to make
yeah,
sure it never comes back. And that makes people smarter. It doesn't make you dumber.
right.
It drives me nuts when we start talking, when I hear people talking about, Christianity is just a dumb thing. And I'm going, no, you don't understand. No, this moves you more towards like the Einstein level. This is where you go into these immersive experiences. You'll understand what super consciousness is. You'll understand what
Yeah,
intelligence is. You understand where it comes from. It comes from the universe. And you know what? If you want more of it, you better get brave enough to speak it as it comes to you, not filtering it, not twisting it, not making it to where it just fits some kind of a cultural thing. But no, we're here to let people know that what we're talking about is a process. It's a process anybody can use. It's a process anybody can try. We just encourage people to go try it because when
yeah,
you do, you get another tool that comes along, which is the self-feedback. You don't, I don't sit around beat myself up. I already know I got problems to overcome. I don't sit around and fixate on that. I fixate on, I know what the process was that I went through that triggered the first of those intense spiritual experiences. I do that same thing today, except I do it in a different context. I don't live in Michigan anymore, but that they made that a hostile environment for me to be there. The medical industry certainly did. The court industry certainly did. The legal industry would refuse to stand up for anybody whatsoever. And you can just be threatened by people over nothing.
Yep.
And so what's the point? At least here, to deal with the dialogue, in North Carolina, people haven't given up the right to use the J word, the Jesus word, or the God word. I think in Michigan, a lot of people have done that. So I don't think people have much of an appreciation for how far we've drifted away
Yeah.
from the core of this practice and what it is that we literally have to have, refugees within our own country to get away from
Oh
places
yeah.
just so you can have dialogue, you know.
Yeah.
And that's how vulnerable that we are as disabled people, especially when the psych industry starts trying to stick their fingers in our lives.
Yeah. And they do that with everybody,
They do.
They want to always they want to be trying to paint somebody who's homeless as having mental issues. And I said, "Don't you dare do that to me. I was just trafficked. Don't fuck
Yep.
with me. Don't
Yeah.
fuck with me." And I meant it. Because they're
Hmm.
like, "Oh, we can send you to a therapist." I don't need a therapist. I'm good. Just let me do
Right.
my life. Let me re-regulate my nervous system.
Ex-
And all this. And I'm like, y'all see me reading. Y'all see that I know what I'm talking about. Y'all see me following a particular diet, at least as best I can. I said, don't
hmm.
mess this up. I should be allowed to have my own life, just given what you know that I know. And
Right.
they knew I'd been trafficked. They knew I'd been tortured. And I said, listen, I said, I'm exposing some fraudulence back in Maryland. Now you can either work with me and do the right thing, because they were also funded by Catholic charities. I said, well, you can be of godly people, and you can do the right thing by me, because you're going to need to. I said, but
Hmm.
do not push this false narrative on me. So I had
Right.
enough of it. That was part of what was going on with me. That they kept trying, listen, when in 2022, it was Valentine's Day 2022. I'm sitting there, I'm laying on the ground watching Eddie Cochran videos, and this broad from the treatment team busts through the front door. Now, how the hell? So Mr. X, who again I didn't realize at the time was so heavily involved with them and so profiteering off me, and that had actually been sold to him. I didn't realize all that
Mhm.
exactly at that time, bust in through the door with 10 cops in riot gear, and they literally dragged me out of my own home. And I'm just sitting there. And my ex is kicking me, calling me the C word and screaming
Jeez.
at me. And, and they dragged me off to a hospital. Oh, no. No, this is not okay. This is
Right.
absolutely not okay, especially when I'd been trying to leave and they kept refusing to help me leave. They wanted to force me to stay with him. Well, now I get it. It was a whole criminal fraud ring. It's not
Sure.
funny to me.
Yep.
Um, and I even asked, I said, well, what in the hell was the point of that to me? He said, well, she felt threatened. I said, threatened by what? And now it's like, oh, because I'm telling the truth, you know.
Yeah.
And then
And
I
that's
realized it was a whole setup that they were trying to have. And I said, well, I'm not playing this game. You no,
no.
you
And
don't
we
get
have these people that have lowered the standard of fear down to the point of ridiculousness, where someone just says, "Oh, you're making me nervous." And wait a minute.
yes,
Me making you nervous is not grounds for you to kidnap me. This is for you to deal
correct.
with your own problems because, as I found, you can't even talk to these people. And they're not there to listen to you
No,
anyway. They're
no,
there to push their agenda down your throat because that's how they make their money, that's how they get
that's
paid, and
it.
that's what makes their world go round, not yours.
Right.
Doesn't matter how much damage that it does to you. It they're just going to do it because they can get away with it. And so that kind of gets us to tool number four, which is eliminating avoidance. We go on the offensive.
Yes.
When I got attacked, I fought back, fired back, and I still do that. I'm
Yeah.
not going to quit doing that. I don't think you're going to quit doing that either. We didn't pick the fight.
Right.
I'm not the one that started it. I'm not the one that hauled me into a courtroom. I'm not the one that lied
Yeah,
under oath. I'm not the one that,
right.
pushed me into a
Perjury.
health
They do
crisis.
perjury for this shit. They do
Yeah,
perjury for profiteering. It's the RICO. It's a RICO. They need
it
to be
is.
prosecuted for that. Yeah.
So, it was what we learned from disease, I guess. We got rid of our avoidance mechanisms. We learned how to take the unseen and move it into our lives. Doesn't mean that because it's unseen, it's unfelt.
Right.
You go live in a nursing home for a week
Yeah.
and keep your attitude intact and tell me how you did that. Try doing something like that. And when you're really challenged to these super deep levels, you'll understand the depth of the neuroplastic shift that's going to go on in your life as you start embracing these things. And I think, I feel like when you really get down to start doing it and trying to get back to what we talked in the beginning is it sounds like what's this sword and how's this burden? The yoke is easy and the burden's light with this sword thing going on. When you drive that stuff out of your life gets so much easier.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And you know, and then when you realize it's just me versus deception, and we're supposed to be sitting here working on our discernment, where that's a vital part of what we're doing, not an exception. It needs to be vital. So it's completely different. What we're talking about is generally completely different than anything that you're going to hear in a church, because we talk more to an ecclesia, more of a church community where people help other people understand the process, work through the process, get stuck in the process will help you get out of that. But we all
Yeah.
realize that there's a process we're going through, and we're really trying to help each other get through it as best we can.
Yeah,
It,
and build that into a practical sense as well, because I don't feel like nobody's being well served with these corporations owning all this stuff. Nobody is being well served
mm-mm.
by all these LLCs and these folks hiding their profiteering or attempting to behind these phony baloney LLCs and paying themselves exorbitant sums of money for doing nothing,
Mm-hmm.
for driving up profits instead of actually helping people.
Yep.
This is where I feel like we need to, rebuild communities, have one-on-one for people, build disabled communities. I've long said, we need to get malls out of REIT ownership, which is real estate investment trust,
Mm-hmm.
put it back into actual community ownership, so that we can have housing contained within, along with, real mixed use, so that
Right.
we have, for the elderly, for the disabled, for people that it could really benefit, to have things like the storage right there, to have entertainment right there, to have
Oh
health and
yeah.
wellness, actual health and wellness, meaning like yoga classes, nutrition classes, somebody who could cook, have somebody right there on site doing that as part of the community, being able to more or less earn their living in there. So we're taking the money middleman out of there. We're taking
Right.
a lot of the profiteering element out of there, and it's very, very direct. And I think
Yep.
we need to get back to that, because at this point, it's too much of this corrupt corporate profiteering, and it's being done at a cost of actual lives, not just the theft of the taxpayers' money, but
Right.
because there are those of us, like somebody in my position. It's not that I can't work. My God, I used to run stores. I know how to do things. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not, I have autism. I'm not fucking stupid.
Right.
I've had my challenges with other things, but now at least I can walk. Do I still have heart issues? Yeah. And, like I said, what happened to me, you're only passing out in the Walmart, and it's happened in a number of other places. Yeah, that still happens, but they were refusing
Mm-hmm.
to even look into my heart problems or even adequately acknowledge them. Well, now I know why. It's a depopulation and a eugenics thing. I'm not happy about it. I just know what it is. I don't talk about Action T4 lightly. This is literally what is happening. And
Right.
people do need to be aware of it. We do need to build that counterbalance. We do need to build actual communities that are inclusive, that feature respect for spirituality, feature respect for the Gnostic Gospels. People don't
Mm-hmm.
seem to want to acknowledge that the gospel is a living thing. The Bible is meant to be a living document. Nobody
Right.
wants to question why there's yes, the Catholic Church may have acknowledged, like, more recent saints and things like that, but why are we not having more books written? There are still deep spiritual experiences like what Moses had, like what the apostles had, like what Saint Stephen had. I consider a lot of what it is that we've had to deal with as we've been talking about a spiritual maturity and a Gnostic,
Mhm.
about the near death experiences and other things that we've experienced that we can talk about very rationally, very sanely, very calmly,
Right.
and put it in a way that makes sense for other people. Why in the hell are we being persecuted for that? It doesn't make sense. So it really feels like that is a modern day version of what happened in Acts of the Apostles.
It is. It's I know I've had to I had to learn to massively deadpan this whole thing when I talk about it. And the reason why, if you really start talking to the emotions involved in it, you let those things come through and your voice and whatnot, then first of all, the labels come flying out of the psych industry towards you when you express yourself in that way. So that's a real nasty thing that happens. But and the more we speak the truth, this is kind of the problem here is that social friction comes out, right? Then the ostracization comes out.
Yeah.
And our clarity on our side of the fence, our clarity is increasing, but on their side of the fence, and I would say the psych side of the fence, we might be sounding crazier and crazier. But no, it's not that at all. It's the fact that you can't deal with the fact that we really can have immersive spiritual experiences while we're alive, before our body dies, which really isn't biblically inconsistent. It's
Right.
really just represents a really tiny shift in interpretation. Yeah, it has a massive implications, but it's really just a very, very small shift in interpretation. And so,
And we
you
have a
know,
psych industry too that they don't want to see us succeed without them because it collapses their whole entire false narrative. It collapses their entire false construct. They know they have no reason to fucking exist,
it
and
does.
they don't.
Right.
They really don't. They are there to do eugenics. They are there to have they have a predetermined outcome, which is to poison and destroy people's brains, because there's no other reason for ECT to exist. What
No.
are they doing other than deliberately causing somebody brain damage? That's exactly
Right.
what it is. And
Mhm.
they need the unvarnished truth spoken into their faces. That's what they're doing. And they know what they're doing.
Right.
And I'm sorry, at this point they actually do know. And that's assault. And I'm not happy about it.
It is.
And I'm not happy for anybody who's been through it, but I'm definitely not happy it happened to me.
No, and I don't feel like we need to argue about it. I'm not going to try and force someone else's agreement. That's what I'm not all about either. If people trying to escalate things and put more threats on me to get me to shut up, that doesn't work. Trying to
No.
shame, using fear or shame, either one of those two power emotions to attack us tends to really backfire because we realize that is the same kind of thing that disease has tried to do to us. So we've already pre-inoculated ourselves against that kind of an attack. So that really doesn't work either. That's not going to change our minds. That's not going to make us quit talking. We're going to keep talking.
Oh yeah.
So we're not
Oh
going to
yeah.
stop. Um, so now the question really gets down to when's this shift going to happen? When is psych going to move from this notion that they're really just trying to fix others? Because isn't that what they're really trying to do? Put out a label and say, this is the way to fix you. We're going to come fix you.
Yeah.
And haven't we already been told a million times you can't fix other people? Those people have to find
Yes.
within themselves what they need to fix that. So really the only thing that you can ever do to help anybody is point out a pathway that they might not be aware of and let them go walk down that pathway and see what that does for them. And
Yeah.
like, there's a pot of gold at the end of that pathway. It's counterintuitive. It's not taught, and as we've both found, it for it leads to your um, abuse if you're not really, really careful. So when we draw up boundaries, I've cut people, I've went no contact with certain people. Why have I done that? Am I doing that to be, rude? Am I doing it to be mean? No, I'm doing it because these people have proven that they're going to interfere in my life in a way that can cause me very serious harm, very serious damage, and that they're willing to do that behind my back without
Hmm.
including me on any of those kinds of discussions. Guess what? I don't need to talk to you anymore. You
Yeah.
know, our time
Yeah.
is over. Nice knowing you, but I don't need that in my life. I got to make sure that doesn't come back in my life because we're sitting here and going through not only these kinds of, physical issues, which we spiritualize, we make that into our spiritual walk, which makes us a target for attack by an industry that's set up to prey on us. And I'm sick and tired of this notion that there is, with reform going on, there is no reform going on. These abuses are so egregious, they're so over the top, they shouldn't even exist. But they do.
Yeah.
They do because they drive pharma profits. They're based on
That's
lies.
it.
They're based on corrupting courtrooms, and they're based on a spineless society that refuses to do anything about it. In fact, we fund it, we egg it on, and now we're even building more places where we can kidnap people into.
Hmm.
And except, people used to complain that prisons cost what, $40,000 a year. Now I think it's $60,000 a year. Well, this homeless prison will cost taxpayers $250,000 a year per
Hmm.
head, and that's really the driving force behind this is money,
That's what
not
it is.
help.
Yeah.
So,
It very definitely is. And I think this is where it comes to be able to point that out, what the financial fallacy is of this, as well as the rest of it. And where if you're, they say, oh, but we want you to be better. We want you. Okay, well, then let me do it my way. How about that? How about you just stay the fuck out my life? And
yeah,
allow me to go on because you're going to find out, now your whole false narrative collapses. And by the way, everybody's looking in your pocket for a change and
right.
seeing where the money is because it sure as hell ain't with me.
No,
I do my best, and I've always done my best to try and live within a budget. And now we see where that narrative line of bullshits is gone. Um,
hmm,
I can do my best. I'm good enough with being able to clean out my trauma and clear up my own mess. Um, and that's not a problem. When anybody wants to, oh, you got a substance abuse issue. God damn it, piss test me. I'm fucking clean. I bet I've
right.
had almost 2 years clean time at this point. I'm real proud of that. Um, and alcohol was never my bag anyway. So even though I'm going to a club to see the Sliggy Boys, and I'm real thrilled to be able to do that. Last time, at least Marshall saw me, I couldn't even walk.
Mm,
So I'm real glad to be able to go in there I
great.
got to watch because of my heart problems. But I'm definitely not drinking. I'm not doing anything, and I'm
Right.
proud of that. And like I said, I do that for my godson's son. I want to be able to say, to people who have had issues, because part of mine were driven not just from the sensory overwhelm of the autism, but as fall out from the SA as a child.
Yep.
And then having to carry all that and all the other things that I was dealing with in my home because I was dealing with two traumatized people as parents, and a lot of
Yeah.
times I felt like the grown up in the house. Um, and dissociating because of the SA and the subsequent like different other trauma that I was dealing with, it was just piling on and piling on and piling on. Well, now I have gone through and gotten rid of it, and these psych freaks were very angry that I was, moving past things and couldn't control me.
Mhm.
I remember when Mr. X spit on me, he was so angry that I was taking control of my own life and being able to say, I don't want to be around you. I
Right.
don't care what you do, but don't harm me in the process. I'm telling you, you can have your own life. Because at a point, I was like, listen, just allow me to be in here because I don't want to be homeless. But it was
Right.
obvious he wasn't going to give that up. And like I say, now I know the full extent of the story. It is what it is. I can't say that I'm not, deeply hurt by the betrayal, but realizing he was only in it for the money to begin with and was just
Right.
searching, and being paid handsomely by people to hurt me in very egregious and deep ways, to study what the trauma reaction was. It is what it is. I can't say that it doesn't hurt, but what I can say is now I can put it into perspective.
Yeah.
I have perspective on my own life. I control my own narrative, and I can control my own future.
So
And
after being through all that, yeah, there's no more pretending, raw honesty becomes real easy. And, this kind of gets back to even the Isaiah 65 thing where you flip it around and where God's talking about the only people that found me were the people that weren't looking for me because you know, they weren't listening to this stuff over here that everybody says is the only way to do it. They were going through this pathway like you and I and so many other people have done. I think, Christ cut the hole through, so now it's wide open. All we have to do is go take the path and get going and watch how it works.
yeah,
And it as rough as it sounds from one side, it's we're really trying to understand or get people to help people understand what it does for you.
yeah,
Um, I'm not crabby 99% of the day. I don't run around insulting people here, there, and everywhere. I'm get along with people where I get intolerant, impatient, short, or I'm biting comments and things of that nature is when I start seeing the same old idiocracy playing out over and over and over and over again. That, just a complete lack of discernment and a complete lack of an attempt to have any discernment because that's socially okay.
yeah.
And we learned that socially okay doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've seen the movie Idiocracy, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, good old Mike Judge, God bless him. Another
Yep.
Texas stoic that makes total sense. Um, yeah, it has become that. I mean, and he was onto that like a while ago. Greg Daniels, same thing.
Hmm.
Because that's the guy that did Upload, and you've heard me talk about that, where I've said this is exactly that's where the cover photo on my Facebook comes from, where it says about Lakeview. That's where that
Okay.
comes from.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
and if you watch the show, it really is about what's going on. I mean, they're talking about consciousness transference and living through the computer and how that's, the monetization of actual life itself and of
Mm.
consciousness. So I recommend anybody to watch that show. It really does explain what's going on right now. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's one of my favorite shows. So you do have artists and things, and this is part of what the disturbing thing is about AI and trying to take artist rights away. Not that corporations haven't been doing that for a long time via copyrights
Oh
and
yeah.
other skeezy stuff. Angie Stone, a great soul singer, was about to go public with receipts on how she was being ripped off for many, many years. And she mysteriously, dies in a car accident
Oh
just as
sure.
she was about to go to court and take it public. Um,
Yep.
and nobody ever knew what happened to Bobby Fuller all those years ago either. Very talented young man and was deceased under very mysterious circumstances.
It's been a lot of
Um,
that, hadn't there?
oh yeah, and that's how that goes into how like a lot of these corporations they rob people. Prince tried to tell everybody to.
Hmm.
Um, they rob people. They rob somebody's creativity. They do make you into a slave, and a lot of times once somebody tries to expose it or get what's rightfully theirs, they end up. And that's how big pharma is. That's what these corporations do. They are run exactly like organized crime. They are organized crime. They're
And
just
they have
legalized organized crime.
and they've gotten away with indoctrinating
Yeah.
people through licensing and through,
Yes.
way too big of paychecks and way too much authority to assault and abuse people. I mean, I just talked to a guy today who had a social worker drop by with 11 pages of defamatory,
Yeah.
stuff that they're going to try and use to justify not allowing him to live freely in the community. It's crushing, it's disgusting, it's,
I think that's the
completely
same
inappropriate.
corporation that was doing that in Maryland, by the
I
way.
and they're and I think what they do is it almost feels like they're salespeople for a corporation where they just traffic people into it. It's like, oh, here's
Yes.
somebody I think fits the, kind of you
Right.
got how many rooms you got, we'll go out and find them. Not that you need them, but just so they can keep the billings at the maximum. Doesn't matter that, the person that has that happen to them just goes into a life of living hell where they have no choice over anything. You can't choose your medications. You can't choose what you want. You can't choose what you don't want. You can't choose when you can walk out the door, where you go. If you own a car, everything is taken from you. You're given a pittance to live on. And what are you supposed to do with that? It is
Right.
deliberately demeaning. It is
Yes.
done in a way to, maximize profits. And,
Yeah.
a lot of the things that we're talking about, if these 70 million baby boomers out there, when you talk about how we have to improve life here, if you think there's two or three people waiting around to take you through your death and tend to your every need, you're flipping crazy. We don't have that many people who are active in the workforce. And if most people are lucky, if they don't get in control of their health, their
Mm.
medical directives, things of that nature, there's a really nasty um, outcome that you could run into out there. And if you run into it, you're not going to like it. That's why I'm DNR on everything. If I don't like it, I'll quit eating. If you try and feed me when I do that, I will
Yep.
just, revolt. There is absolutely no way I'm living like that under any circumstances whatsoever. And it's that kind of defiance that we talked about that comes with all this too.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
And
we're
AI taking over things too. That's another issue that I think that people need to be extremely fully aware of and
mm,
figure out ways, like very practical ways of, again, building other systems that work, that respect people, that allow people to work, earn their living. So that's, I mean, that's where I've been at for a while now. And again, what certain people didn't like, people who wanted to have
hmm
this particular false narrative, they really didn't like that. And I'm like, well, that's
yeah,
just too fucking bad. That's the way it is. I am an independent, sovereign person. And if you really want me to be better and do better and all this, you're just going to do more than pay lip service to it. You're just going to allow me to fucking live my life. Get me away
exactly.
from abusers, keep me away from toxic people, because they had already tried, doing all this fraud to me and, fraudulent, I guess, power of attorney somewhere in there, certainly doing perjury to get all these
hmm
kidnappings happening. And I'm, again, I'm horrified about what I've had to live through, but I'm very grateful to God that this is part of my story of what I've endured and survived, so I can tell it. And
Yeah.
I can help people figure out how to roadmap themselves away from it, and protect themselves from ever having it happen to begin with.
Right. And
Um,
your courageousness and all these things, these are all byproducts of a practice that we would, we're doing our best to help people understand that there's a process at work here and, help us help you. And the best way, I
yes,
guess, that you could help us help you is to put your foot down and get this psych industry off of our backs, demand
yeah,
immediate reform. The kidnapping and drug industry targets spiritual experiences like this to a point where I could very easily see a person who was in a disabled condition who had an experience like mine end up in a place that they could absolutely never get out of
yeah. That's why
and
I'm
be
glad we
perfectly
have Dr.
sane.
Roger McFillin, because he's
Yes.
actually really speaking out about this in a way that's extremely sensible and helping other people to do that too. He's really wanting to get his patients to see where their trauma comes from as opposed to the hand holding and here's a pill.
Right.
He's very much, and I just adore him. And I said, if I had to, if anybody said, well, you should work with someone, okay, well, that would be the one person that I would trust to work with.
Yeah, yeah.
That's it. And I think Intercompass Initiative is doing absolutely fantastic things. We have Mind Freedom International and in Oregon and nationally, Psych Rights, which is Jim
Yeah.
Gottstein and Nancy Rubenstein. I love them dearly. So we do have people who are, who have been involved in the side of, on both sides of the fence, who are now fighting for our rights, and to
Mhm.
make sure those things are secured and are speaking up and out. So I'm glad to see that. And of course, I'm glad that Citizens Commission on Human Rights is out there and, carrying on the work of Thomas Saz, and we have
Yeah.
Dr. Peter Bregan. So there are people out there who are making this known, who aren't
There
dismissive of our experiences for sure.
it's a sad state that Scientology, well, it's not, first of CCHR is really not Scientology. I know SAS and his association with Scientology is there, so that
Mhm.
gets linked in a lot. It's really sad, but I'll tell you what, CCHR does more to defend the rights of spiritual practitioners like you and I than Catholic Charities ever will. They're just as much in on the psych industry as anything, and some of the few people that are really speaking out and saying, get these people off our backs aren't in the mainstream religious movements today. That's an absolute fact, which is scary. Very,
Yeah,
very scary. So
yeah. I think in keeping up with, because there have been more than a few creative people who psychics try to sweep up into their net, and we
mhm.
are seeing a pushback from these folks regarding that. So, just in being able to stay active with the creative community, with
Yep.
comedy fandom and things like that, people who really overcame trauma by using humor, and that's where I've been. I was trying to do, I was able to do a little improv in the shelter, and I was trying to do that even when all the seizures and stuff were happening. So,
Hmm.
I can speak very, very glowingly, I guess you could say, of using the creative energy, how you transform your pain into power. And it doesn't come from being numbed up and drugged out. It comes from
No.
creativity. It comes from that transformation and connection.
Yep.
Connection with others is vital. And to be able to
Energy
do
and
that,
motion.
that's it. People on your wavelength, when they talk about vibration and frequency, people on your wavelength, it says that for a reason, and that's where it is that I'm getting to be, and that is,
Absolutely.
and I celebrate that daily. It's essential to me. It's essential to my actual health, physical and mental, and I'm grateful every day for my missions.
Absolutely. Me too. So with that, I think we about hit our time limit. So I guess if I were to close it, I'd say we're talking about tools, not beliefs. And for us, I think does not equate to belief. So that's what the discernment difference is. We stomp out the I think. Belief gets into we know. And it's about alignment under pressure. So we're doing our best to get this kind of message out. And
Yeah,
I don't know what else to say. We just keep going, and we'll keep taking the flack as we go along. But I think it is getting easier, and
yeah. I think
hopefully
there's
we'll.
a lot more people that aren't afraid of talking about their situation, because there's even like some psychological expression for this. I can't remember what it is, but all it takes, and I think it was in the Rosenhan experiment, where it all it was one person that needed to stand up and do the right thing, and then other
Mhm.
people were like, yeah, you know what, I didn't feel comfortable either. So I think that we are seeing a real groundswell of this happening, and the more that we are able to cohesively tell our stories and get them out there and give people that pathway and help light the darkness up, of a way out of it, and what the alternatives are that actually do work, that are empowering, that recognize each person as a sovereign being,
Yeah.
and take that nothing about us without us. And really kind of, I'd said recently, in a Zoom meeting with some folks from Mind Freedom, I want to help pick up where Judy Chamberlain left off.
Mm.
She's unfortunately no longer with us, but that doesn't mean that her work uh, is unnoticed or wasn't important, or that
Right.
there are people like myself and you and others who are trying to pick up and take up, where she left off, to make sure that that progress doesn't
Yep.
get curtailed, that we're able to continue that. It's necessary.
We're gonna be fierce about it. So great.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot, and
Thank
I
you.
guess we'll see you next week.
Yep. Always a pleasure. Enjoy your weekend.
Same
God
here. Had a
bless.
great time. Talk to you
All
later.
right.
Bye
Much love.
bye.
Bye.